Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and we are diving in again to look at the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally using sound for health and wellness. I want to thank everyone for joining me for the last episode with Thomas Orr Anderson. Really a fascinating look at both the science and art behind these fields, and perhaps some clarifications, some questions and challenges for the field as well. I look forward to continuing to follow Thomas and his journey. Our guest today is 3 Trees. This past summer, I was on a journey west, a grand adventure to the Pacific Northwest and the desert Southwest and everywhere in between. And before I left on the trip, knowing that I would have several days in Sedona, I decided that I must get a sound healing session from someone while I was there. When you are involved in holistic fields, not only is self-care really important, but you can learn a lot from having sessions with others. As I looked for a sound healer in Sedona, I instantly zeroed in on 3 Trees. I was drawn into what I was seeing, hearing, and reading about him, so I sent an email and actually did not hear from him until I was in Sedona. And his email said, "I have a free community appreciation sound healing tonight at the Creative Life Center. Doors open at 6:30. So obviously, I went. And what a crowd had arrived and lined up for him. I was very lucky to be one of the ones that got in the door. And this ended up being his farewell concert, leaving Sedona after 16 years to hit the road to tour, teach, and start a new chapter in his journey. The outpouring of love and support for him was so apparent at this performance. And it wasn't just a performance, it was transformational, it was intense, it was powerful. His use of drums, flutes, didgeridoo, his voice were otherworldly to me. I felt he was truly connected to spirit, a divine calling. The day following the performance, he had a sale at his home selling all kinds of things, music gear, musical instruments to help pare down for his journey ahead. So, of course, my travel companion and I just had to go, and we did get some things, including an ocean drum, Egyptian drum, acoustic bass. I reached out to 3 Trees again via email when I was home in Iowa after the few-week road trip, and I asked him where his tour would be taking him, and if he might like to perform in Iowa, where I live. And yes, indeed, he was going to be coming this way in the fall. I helped organize a performance at a local venue where he also offered 2 drumming workshops. And I was so glad the community got to experience this incredible guy. I was really intrigued by the stories he shared and the powerful information he brought and wanted to hear more. So I am so glad he's able to join me today. 3 Trees, welcome to the podcast.
Wow. Well, that's quite an introduction. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and to speak to you and whatever we're going to talk about here.
I thought it would be just wonderful. I remember some of your stories about your background, for example, your rock band days and the things that prompted and propelled you into sound healing. Why don't you kind of tell us whatever feels right about your background and timeline and how you got to where you are now?
Wow. Okay. So I hope this is a really long podcast. It's hard to put all of that into into a short kind of version.
That's okay.
But yeah, I mean, I always loved music as a child and was always kind of messing around with instruments and playing music and that just kind of led to playing rock and roll. And just to be able to play music, because music was always kind of cathartically healing for me, as it is for most people who play music or even listen to music. And so I just kind of followed that path, and I just seemed to have a natural knack for picking up instruments and hearing notes. And as a kid, I remember I used to figure out little commercial jingles on the piano when I was a kid. That was my one finger and stuff. But I just it just became a passion of mine, and so I followed that path, and that just kind of led to being, you know, as normally as we're teenagers and kids, I wanted to be a rock and roller, a rock star, and all that kind of stuff that goes with it. And so I just kind of went on that path and was in a lot of bands throughout most of my life, and was pretty successful, especially towards the end. So I had one band that we were together for quite a few years, and gained quite a bit of popularity in the Michigan tri-state area, and elsewhere. And it was kind of a touring college rock band, and we were kind of I was a bass player back then, actually. And so I played bass for about 16 years or so, 15, 16 years. And the band we were in was kind of a funk jam band, funky, jammy, bluesy, a little jazzy, kind of like Fish meets Blues Traveler meets Primus kind of thing. And we were together and being fairly successful and touring around, and we even toured the country of Peru, which was a big shift in my consciousness, and also at a time in my life where we're really successful in touring, but it was pretty unhealthy. We were kind of stereotypical rock and roll kind of attitude dudes, and overindulgent in all ways, and it was very unhealthy. And I remember there was a couple moments that really were a push for me to kind of go in a new direction. And I'd been longing for a while to reconnect to the spirit, to feel a spiritual connection. And in the rock and roll life, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to really follow that path. And so, I was kind of really getting into reading all sorts of spiritual texts and any sort of ism I could get my hands on, and collected quite a wonderful collection of mystical books and books on shamanism and Sufism and mysticism and all these things, and I was really reading, which was really helping to fuel the fire of this desire for spiritual connection. But at the same time, the reality of my dream of being a rock and roll star was kind of counterproductive to that. And so at one point, I had to make a decision. There was a couple points. One of them was Peru, and that was kind of created an awakening in me. One show where we played with these Afro-Peruvians, and it was the first time I experienced kind of live ethnic drumming and the power of tribal drumming. And they came out in full regalia with all the djembes, and the dancers came out, and I was just blown away at the energy that I was feeling, and something that was awakening in me, where I was like, I want to know more about that. And we played a lot of shows, and we were kind of an energy band, to begin with, and but I never really felt that kind of sacred, this powerful feeling from the sounds and the drum rhythms. And of course, Peru in general was really influential in the kind of awakening this spiritual desire. Also, I had a lot of conscious bubbles kind of pop in my head while I was there. That was the beginning of me kind of saying, well, I want to explore that and what that is. And then the second point was, after we got back, we released a new CD, and we played in a place where I used to go see all my favorite bands, and we were headlining, and it was our second CD release, and it was a big theater place, and the place was full, and things were rocking, and it was actually on my 30th birthday, And I had this moment where everything slowed down. The place was just rocking. We were rocking. And it was kind of like one of those movie scenes where things kind of slow down in tunnel vision.
Mm-hmm.
And and I had this a moment where I was just like, I felt like I'd kind of accomplished my childhood dreams, which weren't extravagant as far as being super rich and marrying a model or those kind of things, although other band members, that wasn't my band, had those aspirations. Mine was a little more humble, but I didn't want to, have a lifestyle where that's all I did was just play music. But I just really had this moment of realization of the slow demise of my soul and my body from the overindulgence and the unhealthy living of that rock star lifestyle. And I kind of had this moment of now what?
Mm-hmm.
While I was on stage, it was the strangest thing. And so I had to, I kind of had this decision in my head of like, I need to do something else before I get too far into it, before it's too late to turn around,
Yeah.
And so it was really hard because that was my childhood dreams, and I was living my childhood dreams, but yet this new longing for spiritual connection, healthier life, and more love and more peace, in my life, kind of overrode that. And so I decided I needed to, or get up the pot. And so I, fairly soon after, quit the band. And to make things short, moved into, I bought a drum and moved into the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And shamanism was kind of one of my paths back. Mysticism and shamanism I really connected with. And so the idea of a drum as a tool for medicine, sound medicine, kind of came up. And so I bought my drum and I moved into the woods to kind of start the spiritual path, and didn't know if music was going to be included in that at all. I just knew I had to make a shift. But luckily Spirit had plans for me that I could still play music and that thing that I was passionate and had this love for, but in a different way that was focused on health and healing and spiritual connection. And that was kind of the beginning of that journey. Mm. And shortly after that, during that time, I kind of felt stuck and didn't have any teachers really at that time, other than all the books I was reading, and kind of knew what to do. But there is a time where you kind of need some teachers, or you kind of need to go past the learning into the doing. And so I decided I needed to do a vision quest to get some inspiration, which is also a common theme in the indigenous peoples and in the shamanic traditions. And so I traveled across the country and found a spot. This is another shortening things a lot, but I ended up doing a vision quest up in northern Idaho. And vision quest, for those who don't know, is to keep that short, is just a kind of a indigenous tradition. It's very common in many cultures around the world, and it can be as a rites of passage, from manhood, or from childhood to manhood, or womanhood, or the womanhood, or at the time in your life where you need guidance, you feel stuck, and you're looking for spiritual guidance. So you basically, traditionally, you find a medicine person, an indigenous medicine person or a shaman, and they would help guide you to prepare yourself, and then you basically fast and get ready and get yourself clear and focused and walk out into the woods and find a spot that calls you to sit, and you sit there until you get your vision or your message from Spirit. And so, traditionally there's no tent or anything like that. And so there was a big aspect of a rites of passage for me, personally, going through the fears, of course, sitting out in the woods where there's mountain lions and wolves and bears and things in the middle of the night by yourself with no tent and thing. And then once you kind of get past the fears is when the vision came to me, and that's when I got my name and got some information from Spirit of my past, of my present place, and the future. And they were basically guided by 3 different trees so I would say, like, Spirit spoke through these 3 different trees that I found myself in the center of, this triangle of trees. And that was kind of the solidification of my path, and getting a clearer message of my path to follow. And then I kind of kept the name as a reminder of my new path. And so I started introducing myself. I moved away from Michigan and was meeting new people, and I just started introducing myself as Three Trees as a gentle reminder of my new path, and to re-solidify it every time I said it, every time I heard it. You know, I needed reminders back then, and so that was then soon after that I could do some other wanderings around. Ended up in Sedona, and was there for the last 16 years up till last August. Whew! All right, so that was kind of a very abridged version of what happened.
I'm sure, I mean, as myself, a musician and being in bands and that whole scene, I'm sure that was really a difficult decision. I'm sure that there was a lot of emotion saying to the band, sorry, this is it, I'm done. I'm sure it was difficult at first, but once you kind of allowed that and opened the door, things were allowed to blossom for you. It sounds like it sounds like a kind of a wondrous adventure, but I'm sure it was really challenging.
It was very challenging. All I really knew for the last, up until that point, almost, my whole life was just playing music and playing in bands, for over a decade, and so that was all I knew. And so it was very strange, and it was also leaving everything. It was this. I left Michigan. I left all my friends. I left because I just had to, because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it if I stayed in that same atmosphere. And I felt like the ship was sinking. And I didn't want to go down with the ship. So I knew that I had to change everything. Move somewhere else, meet new people, recreate myself, so to speak. And it was really tough but the desire to go on the new path that was more connected and in a healing way was a stronger desire than that desire to hold my youth's vision of being that rock and roller dude.
Well, expand a little bit more if you can. So you arrived in Sedona, and where was the progression as far as, right, you had this one drum, and of course now you have this whole performance you do with all these instruments, maybe even just starting with the drums. How did that progress for you? Like the different rhythms that you use, how are you inspired to use the drums specifically?
Yeah, well, I was already on the path before I got to Sedona. I shortened that story quite a bit. But I already had a lot of training and was already on this path fully. But it was still kind of a mixture. I still like to play music, but I was kind of getting into more world music. I was teaching West African drumming. I was doing this with some kind of world jazz band stuff, but at the same time I was still working on doing sound healing, and I was still a little bit of a duality there, although the type of music I was getting into had shifted quite a bit. But it was a path of starting with that drum, because that was the shamanic tradition, and then, as I mentioned, shamanism was kind of something I felt connected to, because I always felt connected to nature. That's where I always felt the most connected to the universe, to spirit, was when I was out in nature and feeling my connection to the trees, the animals, the earth, and so that shamanic tradition was kind of what I followed, and so that was a very common tool in that medicine way of using the drum and the rattle. But I was already, by the time I got to Sedona, I'd already been incorporating some other things like didgeridoos and flute, and wasn't really using much of my voice yet. But what happened in Sedona is I started to just let spirit guide me into sounds, into healing instruments. And of course, this is all happening while sound healing is was starting to gain popularity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as the crystal bowls started to come out in the late 70s or so, and in the 80s they started to gain more. People started to use them more, of course, and so I just started incorporating more. But the interesting thing was starting on the indigenous path and learning those traditions. And of course, the didgeridoo is an indigenous instrument also, but was that the through the learning, through the doing, through the experience, you kind of start to gain a larger understanding and start incorporating new things, because it was the progression. And so for me, as I started to realize about frequency, that for me it was like, well, the more frequencies I have to work with, the more levels of healing I can work with, more, understanding that certain frequencies affect certain things. And so, different energy bodies. And so why not have a large variety of frequencies to work with? And of course, incorporating and when I began with the drum, of course, that was in the indigenous shamanic traditions. Most of them are very straightforward, shamanic pulses, or heartbeats and things like that. And when I met my African teacher, which happened once after I got to Sedona, actually, or at least the one that really taught me more about the healing aspects of rhythm, was a big thing. Was a big thing for me that I really hadn't seen other people using in sound healing, other than, of course, the indigenous peoples. And so I really started incorporating drum rhythm and going deeper into drum rhythm as part of sound healing, which isn't quite as common thing that's seen yet. But it's been a journey since Sedona, just incorporating more and more instruments, more and more frequencies, because they each one do have their own thing that they hold, their own medicine they hold within their own spectrum of frequencies, as well as kind of elemental feelings through the different instruments. So it just made sense to me to keep expanding, to keep exploring, to keep incorporating more. And that's just how Spirit guided me through. So it's been it's been 18 years now, and it's been, it just keeps going deeper and more things. I just incorporated gongs a couple of years ago, so I was never doing gongs before that. And so it's just, and I'm using a lot more of my voice now, which is, of course, one of the oldest sound healing instrument, of course. So it just Spirit just keeps saying go deeper, and I keep saying okay, and and so now, that's a lot of frequencies, a lot of instruments that I try to bring forth.
Right, so it's a real combination of the shamanic practices and then perhaps some contemporary techniques as well.
Absolutely, and then some that seem to be that I'm understanding through the process, and how those incorporated that aren't being taught anywhere or whatever. It's just kind of you kind of go through the process yourself, and certain things teachers can't teach you. You have to do the doing, and the understanding, the depth of the understanding really comes from the doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that takes you into places that aren't being taught, so that you just kind of understand at deeper levels. And so it started to become where it almost started to feel like this was kind of a new way it was coming through, or well, not new, but new in a way that's incorporating so many different things. And so for me, it's all rooted in that indigenous traditions, but then incorporating some of the science, that's been coming out, and also these more contemporary techniques with sound, and then going to this other place, which is the deeper understanding of how they all work together and how frequency is working within us. That that I wasn't taught.
Hmm. If you were, this might be a difficult question, I'm not sure. Just kind of thinking about if you were to try to describe in words, for example, what the didgeridoo or your voice or a drum does for you personally, or perhaps for somebody you're working with, what is it about the didgeridoo? What do you feel that influences, or what is it now that you're using your voice that you feel that transforms, or what part of you do you feel an influence in when you're using a particular instrument?
Yeah. Well, I think, well, first off, there has to be a connection to you personally.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For any instrument, especially in the healing, not only just in the healing way, but all instruments, of course, as a musician, but there has to be, first and foremost, like you feel a connection there. And so I felt a deep connection to the drum, and it took me on a path, and I, things I feel connected to over the years shift and change. Or new things I feel a new connection to come in. And so the way that in the beginning of the journey, I think for me, it was like going to roots, right? The ancient part of ourselves as a human experience in the human evolution, and those instruments that were so potent and powerful and used in a sacred way, and how we gathered together in community and told our stories and honored the sacred and singing and dancing around the fire, that stuff that's kind of really deep within us. For me, the instruments that it was like building a foundation is what I kind of look back and see now. That drum and the didge, were just these ancient instruments that have been used for tens of thousands of years. They've carbonated the didgeridoo at up to 60 to 100,000 years old. We're finding pieces of them in the caves in Australia and things. And in my philosophy, or my understanding of how I think of instruments, is that they come in reflecting consciousness. They reflect or vibrational support of where consciousness is at, and also the energies that we're working with in that consciousness. So the didge has that ancient kind of primordial life force sound, and so it came into existence in that beginning of our journey, and bringing in that powerful life force. And the drum kind of, as we started to get into the rhythm of life and understanding the cycles and the rhythms of the universe and the rhythms of our human experience, they start to come out through this thing called the drum, and so it's kind of like as above, so below, that the energetic or conscious aspect, the spiritual aspect is manifesting in a physical form through these instruments. So different instruments come into the human experience as the human experience and consciousness is shifting and growing and expanding. And so, the Tibetan bowls are thousands of years old, and the gongs come in thousands, 2,000 years old. And then more recently is, we're working on higher consciousness and things. So we get these more kind of angelic and these more, what we would phrase, quote unquote, higher vibrational things, like, the crystal bowls, the hand pans are a new one that have come in and things. And they, for me, they kind of they coincide with the evolution of the human experience, and these healing instruments and the frequencies they represent kind of have a tie-in with that, and they come in as a physical form to help and support those frequencies. Whoa.
So do you apply this in I know you teach as well, you have your own method, soul-monic sound healing. So what's soul-monic? What's that part of it? And what would a class look like?
Well, I mean, it's when I started using Facebook a lot, started getting into this and having to call it something. For many years, I called it shamanic sound healing because I was incorporating, had these foundations of these shamanic traditions. But then, especially living in Sedona, just the word over the last few years has become more and more used flippantly, I guess. People just kind of use it and throw it out there. Maybe they take a weekend course and now they're a shaman, or they could, or they call in the directions and they call themselves a shaman or something. And because of my teachers and understanding a little more of the history of that, it always felt a little weird because to me, the apprentice was usually picked by the indigenous shaman or medicine person of the tribe, usually picks, and that apprentice works with them for years or half their life, hand in hand, with that person a long time. There's a lot of training and so just out of respect, it kind of felt weird. And I've never called myself a shaman because of that, because I've never been given that title by a shaman, or have spent the amount of years, to do that studying work. And that's usually a title that is given once you are ready, kind of thing. And so, and because people were kind of using it all the time, and I really felt that I was going to this other place. So there's a lot of worlds you can work with in the shamanic realm that aren't necessarily about love. They're not necessarily about divine love or your experience of peace and love and joy in this world and making the world a better place, or your connection to God, Spirit, whatever that name is. Sometimes it's quite different. Sometimes it's really ego-driven, or it's using the creational forces that we do have access to, but in a way that's more humanistic and not that shamanism isn't spiritual, of course it is, but there's many people who use shamanic technique that is more about the ego, and it is more about what you want to achieve, or asserting your power over someone else, or calling in certain forces to achieve a certain outcome, which may not be in divine alignment, and which may not be in alignment with love and peace and joy. And for me, I started going down this path of more love, more peace, more joy, more spiritual connection into what's in the highest good and divine alignment, and not necessarily what I think needs to happen or what I think is the important part of what's coming through in sound healing, or that I'm doing this sound healing. It more became a soul connection. It was about the soul. It was about our spiritual and divine connection to whatever that higher power is, whatever name that you use, because that's what it was becoming for me. Was this was a spiritual path, and my love and connection to spirit was deepening, was growing. I was feeling more gratitude, more blessings, and more love in my life, and my love for what is beyond the human experience. And so, it was this one night it just came up that these soul harmonics and from shamanic sound healing, and kind of put it all together, and it came out soul-monic. Mm-hmm. And because it has foundations in shamanism, but in shamanic technique, but it was going somewhere else. So it was almost like divine communion is what it became with me. And when I started to go into that deepening of that and allowing that divine communion to happen while I'm doing a session or in a sound healing experience, that I just started going into this place of like this deep prayerful meditation, which a lot of people can, but it's I was really just focusing on this love, and I can only relate it to when I was a young teenager. I had a born again experience thing, and I became a born again Christian, and all this energy and love and this spiritual power from the divine was just flowing through me, and I had all sorts of crazy experiences that we could do a whole show on that alone. But and that's kind of what I was relating it to as that I was starting to go into during these sound sessions. And when I did, things started shifting. Not only was my experience of the sound healing different in the way that I wasn't expending my energy really anymore. I wasn't getting tired, having to take a break after a few sessions. I was experiencing deeper, profound healing within myself after a session, and a deeper connection. And so I started to just go into that place of like this communion, right? Like this deep, powerful communion with spirit to allow it to flow through. And then what also happened is everyone else's experience became much more profound and deeper. So it worked on both levels, not only for them, but for me. And so I just kept following that path as almost like a spiritual practice almost, and as a prayerful communion. And then as that happened, then everything is just, exploded and blossomed, more and more every year since I've kind of gone in that direction. And so soul-monic was kind of the name represented more of what was important to me in this, which was going into the soul and going into this spiritual connection and having a communion with the divine presence through the process of while all these frequencies are coming through. And so for me, it works on much deeper levels that way. And it seems to affect people that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Just being that conduit.
Right.
Or just getting out of the way. Getting out of the teachings. Once the teachings are kind of integrated and part of the integration of who you are, you don't have to think about them anymore. They do themselves, right? So then all I had to focus on was just getting more and more into a place of spiritual flow, and being that conduit to allow that to come through. So the name represented that more, that soul-monic. But it's just a name. but
deeper than that. Yeah.
It's kind of cool, but it is just a name, and it just felt better than using that shamanic sound healing anymore, because it felt like it was going to another place. Yeah, because that's the other thing, is not just sharing it, but I really want to get the information out, because it is the time. I guess if there's one thing I'd mention is that everyone should know that it is the time for frequency. It's like part of our evolutionary process, and a firm believer that that's part of what's helping us evolve into our next place, is understanding frequency, not only on kind of the human experience level of science and whatnot, but for our spiritual evolution and the evolution of our human experience, that we're going into frequency. And so the more people who are trained in how to do that and how to share that and be part of that, sharing with the world, I think it's an important thing. And that's why I love doing the trainings too, is because we're creating all these sound vortexes for the divine, the universe, for what we need for that evolution. And that's why it's becoming more and more popular, and because it's that time, and I feel how I'm sharing it is important to keep it rooted and grounded in a spiritual context, in this divine love kind of context, and not so much into the science as a lot of it we can see in the internet and things, and figuring out certain hertz and frequencies for certain things, and people get caught up in the science of it too much, or the coolness of it, or whatever. But that this is something beyond that.
Right, that the experience is the understanding, right? Truly experiencing it is how you get the real data and the real feedback. Right,
and if they're all, and it's about the intention, right? So we can use science with the intention of love, or we can use the science with the intention of war, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can use the science, or we can use sound with the intention of divine connection, or we can use the science or the science of sound healing for personal gain, or accolades, or for things of the ego, or and when those intentions are in those different realms, those frequencies of those things are being amplified out. So for me, it's important when teaching people about sound healing that they have a deep understanding that this is a way to allow the divine to flow through you, and for those frequencies of love and light to expand not only to the practitioners and the people who are attending, but out into the world infinitely. So this is part of a spiritual evolution, and a way to connect to God, to the divine, in a way that doesn't have any dogmas, that doesn't have rules and regulations, so to speak, or fears of burning in hell or doing things or whatever that is. It's like this is pure. Sound is pure and unadulterated, in its own sense. And so we have to be careful of what we're infusing those sounds with. And so that's why I try to get people to make sure they understand that we're not just using sound and frequency to heal up bodies or to break up whatever energy thing, you know what I mean? And isn't this cool? And that this is wow, this is divine, this is God flowing through. And to get those their intentions in alignment with that. Because there's plenty of people out there teaching, all sorts of methodologies and teaching this and that about this frequency and that frequency. And a lot of times that aspect gets left out more than it should.
Intention is crucial.
Right. So if the intention is to allow divine source to flow through you, boom, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You can't get better than that. So that's what I try to teach when I'm teaching.
Mm.
Just to not only for your own personal spiritual evolution, but that you become that conduit for the divine, right? For that divine love, that divine peace and joy, and not our version of it, which is limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how I feel, kind of like what part of my calling in all this is.
Allowing it to start from a single point and then spread infinitely beyond, Yeah. The single point is your intention, but then what it connects to is infinite.
Right. Yeah. And to get people knowing that this is a powerful thing we're doing. It's shifting DNA, right? It's changing our DNA to frequency. It's changing the way our body's wired and how our brain is being wired. And we're working with a lot of things that we're only beginning to understand on a science level. But, the indigenous people have known a long time that the sounds are an amplifying intention. So if that's true, then shouldn't that intention be the highest possible intention possible? And in alignment with the divine, with the infinite source, with God. So I feel that's part of my calling in all this, this evolution of sound in our human experience, and how in sound healing, vibration therapy, and and it's growing. The hospitals are starting to bring it in and everything. That I give the perspective for sound healing. My job is to give this perspective and this information.
So I believe you teach at least a level 1, level 2. How do you find approaching this philosophy you have, this soul-monic idea, when you're teaching sound healing? Are you also not only teaching how to use these instruments, but is it how to tune into yourselves? It's kind of this mix of practices for self-care as well as techniques.
I feel like when I teach my sound healings, it's not just about the sound and the instruments, but spiritual philosophy, spiritual ideas, and as a way to understand the universe in a deeper way, and have that way of understanding be rooted in love and rooted in light and joy and peace and the betterment of humankind and the acknowledgement that we're all in it together and let's do our part. I definitely try to teach that as best as I can. Of course, that's a personal journey for everyone. So I can only kind of put out the ideas, some of the philosophies, some of universal laws, or so to speak, or divine truths, and kind of incorporate them so that the awakening is just put the information out there for your own awakening to happen, but also, try to push the boundaries of going to places that are, because it is kind of fearful to go to those places. It could be uncomfortable, or there's a little bit of fear in there. Course in Miracles uses the phrase that the thing we're truly the most fearful of is how powerful we truly are. It's not death. It's not this or that. It's actually the own power of the divine power that resides within us. That's what we're most fearful of, is really stepping into that. So going outside what's comfortable, I do try to do that a little bit in a few exercises through the process. But it is something you have to learn on your own. You have to go there, right? You have to make those decisions, and that takes practice too. I'm still learning on going deeper, and more allowance, and so it's as Abraham would say, we never get it done, and so I think that's exciting that we never get it done, that we get to explore, deepen, and grow. I've always had my own issue with the word master, and sometimes people say, "Oh, you're a master sound healer," whatever. It's like, I know that to me, that's something that's unattainable. It's something you strive for, but never attain. I think once you're the master, then why be here anymore, right? And so I guess that's the relationship to the enlightened masters, right? They got it done, right? And now they ascend, and then right. So once you acquire that mastery, there's no use to really being here other than support others. So for me, it never ends. You're always going deeper, right. And so this is a process I think with sound healers that they need to go through. That it's not just these methodologies; it's part of it's a way to deepen your spiritual connection. It's a way to offer divine service to others, right? To be a positive part in the evolution of the human experience, but to really step in is a scary thing, and so that usually takes practice of slowly taking those walls down and going a little deeper, going in a little farther into those places where you feel uncomfortable, to allow the spirit to flow through, to allow the humanness to step out of the way. And so that's something that's always evolving, I think, at least in my life. And part of this whole tour is part of that journey too. It's not just, I realize it's everything's multidimensional, everything's multifaceted and correlated to each other. And so, the divine calling that I got was, all right, get it out there. But at the other, it also coincided with the fact that I want to go deeper. It's time to go to the next level. It's time to go back to the well in one aspect, draw from that source. So what better way than to take a vision quest around the country for a year.
Yeah, I mean, you had such a flourishing and developmental time in Sedona for those 16 years that something clicked that it was time to have a change in your world. And so you have been on tour. What are some highlights? What's your past year been like on the road?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a learning experience. You know, it's way different than my touring experience in the rock band. You know,
Yeah.
and plus I'm you know, by myself. Although I have my dog Marley that toured around with me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness, he's a great buddy and a teacher in his own right. Um, but it's been amazing just connecting with people and just going deeper into this this path of mine, this and where's it going, and what's the divine plan, and how do I need to step into that um, more? You know, not only stepping into um, how I present it to people, but also what it means to me and what it means in my spiritual life. So it's been you know, it's up and down. It's been very humbling in other areas, you know, and sometimes very surprising. And when when I was in Marion, it was beautiful to see such a large, supportive sound healing community in a place, you know, I wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And then some places where you expect it's going to be like something, and then it's like there's hardly no one there,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um, and so it's been good that way too. Just kind of humbling from being in Sedona, being fully supported and prosperous, and people searching me out and you know, inviting me to conferences and everything. You know, it's just like, I had no reason to leave there. That's for sure. It's beautiful. I loved it, and I had no plans on leaving until this kind of calling. And I ignored it for a while. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go on tour. I'm not going to go. This is, you know, why would I leave this? This is great. But then a certain amount of circumstances just kind of all came into alignment. Where I was like, okay, it's time. I'm supposed to do this, and you have to say yes to those things. That's how I got to where I am, was saying yes to those things. That's the calling that had me quit the band. That's the calling that had me follow the different instruments, the different journeys, the different teachers, you know, and following the bliss, as it's been said, right? And so I, even though it didn't seem like this would be following the bliss, I knew it was a calling, and I had to, because my bliss was in Sedona, but I knew that there was a higher plan, and I had to trust that. And I know Spirit will give you a gentle push or a nudge, and then a harder push, and, you know, eventually you get that golden 2x4 over the head. So I didn't want to wait till the golden 2x4 hit me over the head. I'm trying to live in a more gentler life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before that happened, and you know, the constructs of my reality was totally torn down and destroyed, I decided to do it consciously,
Right.
you know, and say, okay, you want me to go? I'm going to do it. I think that's part of following, you know, your divine path and being in divine alignment is not saying no when you know it's a higher calling, and even if you have fears or doubts of how that's going to turn out, that you have to follow it. And so the wonderful thing that was kind of unexpected was the humbling aspect of going out and people not knowing me in many places I go and never heard of me. Right? And so it's like starting over. So it's like okay, it's like paying your dues all over again.
Yeah.
So yeah. So you know, you think after, you know, 30 years of music, 35 years of music, it's like, okay, I've paid my dues.
Mm.
But this is a new adventure again, and now it's like paying the dues over again. So, but the beautiful thing is me going deeper into saying this is all perfect, right? Yeah. So, you know, there's even been a couple shows where there's been, you know, 4 or 5 people, you know, and it takes me 2.5 hours to set up and 2.5 hours to tear down, and a 2-hour session. It's like, okay, you know, but to know this is I've been getting deeper into this just total surrender of like, this is exactly how it's supposed to be. The right people are here. It's not just about my prosperity or, you know, having a big successful thing. It's the perfect people who are supposed to get their activations or the healing are there, right? We've all called each other into the experience, and it's beyond this whole human experience thing of money and whatnot, and the total trust. And then this person, then the next week is like, or 2 weeks later, it'll be like this huge show, lots of prosperity. So it's saying when it's not that's perfect and awesome also. And then of course those few people that are there are many times the perfect person who's going to get the word out next time I come through, or has this connection to that person, or has some other work that they're doing, or are in a time of their life that they so needed this type of sound healing. So, and that's beyond the money or the amount of people that are there. And so that's a humbling experience, not only for my ego and used to playing huge shows and conferences and things, but also humbling in a way that's like, wow, Spirit is so amazing, and this divine plan and how things unfold is so magical and mystical, and what an amazing thing to be in this life, to experience that, and to grow in consciousness in that, and seeing when those things are like, wow, this is amazing and perfect, and thank you for these 3 people. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, so I'm assuming you're continuing on this tour. What are you excited about this year? Or do you try not to plan what's coming up next? Or do you have something kind of in the works for this year ahead?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because organizing and the kind of business aspect of things is not my forte. As you may, I don't know, some artists are different, but I think many artists, that's a part of the brain that's not in balance with the artistic brain. And so the business aspect has been a little hard for me, and that's been another learning experience. And of course, I'm way behind on booking my tour right now. That's kind of been the norm throughout my tour, is a lot of my stuff gets set up 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. And but that's been another beautiful experience too, that, oh my gosh, 2 weeks, how am I ever going to have a successful thing? And then Spirit just aligns it, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, this person, that person, and it all comes together, and magically, it's this amazing experience comes through with hardly no setup or time, So the universe sends its support. So I've been flying by my seat, giving thanks for Spirit supporting in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I have a thing going. I'm going to Sedona, or Scottsdale, Sedona, in Arizona, for a couple of days, and I'm going to hang out for a few days with a Yakwe Indian shaman friend of mine down in Tucson, and then I'm going to California for about a month, 5 weeks or so. And I started to set up. I got a few things coming in now for California that I've just started setting up, and then I'm going to head back east towards you guys and all the way to the East Coast. So those things are not set up yet. So that's what I'm doing this week.
All right.
But I'll be touring. But I'll be touring until the end of July,
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And then I may figure out a place where I'm going to kind of root down for a little bit. Maybe not permanently, maybe more temporary, but at least have some sort of foundation place, right? Because I've had nothing. I'm just in, touring in the van. So until I get a clear vision of where I'm supposed to be. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of the divine pants, so to speak.
Keeps it interesting, doesn't it?
It does. And it keeps it magical that way, too.
That's right. Yep. Whatever's supposed to happen will happen.
Right. So wherever it's called forth, I just try to show up.
Yep. So you're sounds like you're going to start setting up the next few months. Where can people find you online, maybe following what you're doing, or maybe they want you to come to their neck of the woods? What's the best way to find you online?
Well, you can contact me through email. You can go to my website, and there's a contact there, or on Facebook, messaging, or calling me. That's part of how I set the tour. Is just like I had, a fairly large mailing list of people over the years, and just sent out, being in Sedona, and then I sent out a e-blast saying, hey, if you want me to come to your neck of the woods, just give me a call or give me an email. And really all I need is a place to, because if I don't know the area, right? So if someone has connection to community and knows of a good yoga studio or a different event space, that would be good to hold it at. And then that's kind of it. And so, that's kind of how I started the tour. And people just emailed back, hey, I'd love to come here, and just as you did, and we just kind of go from there, set it up, and send in the information and getting the word out.
And so, what's the range of, right? There's obviously performances that you do, but you also can do teaching and workshops.
Yes. Yeah. So there's different things. Usually the group sound healing is the main part of what I'm trying to offer, because I believe part of that divine plan is there's some activation stuff that's happening through them, and giving people an experience that don't necessarily get a chance to have an experience outside the human one. So I think there's some activation stuff through that. But then with the teachings, there's the toning workshops, or using the voice, sacred sounds for healing yourself and others, as well as kind of drumming workshops that you experienced. And then I have my 3-day level 1 and the 3-day level 2, and sometimes I push it into 2 days. And of course I do have like a live kind of music, more like a concert performance thing that I do, that I've only done a couple times on the tour so far, but just because it hasn't been called forth. But where I do a lot of some of my African music stuff and world music stuff, and more like songs as opposed to sound healing. But a lot of the same instruments, of course, just presented in a different way. And people get up in a little dancing, some booty shaking, some African rhythms, and get people singing some of the African chants and stuff, and some old traditional songs and things. So I do that sometimes too.
So you have a variety of CDs. Do you think all your experiences and the ups and downs is inspiring new sound creations? Maybe a new CD when you get settled somewhere?
Yeah, I'll definitely have to do it once I get settled somewhere. But yeah, it's definitely something that's been in my field of vision to accomplish. But right now, I can't think too much about it. Just trying to stay focused on all the stuff I'm working through in the moment. But once I get settled down, then I could start working on something like that. But yeah, that's in the mix for sure. And I'm trying to get a little more media savvy. I'm actually gonna, hopefully within the next week or so, get a Instagram account, which I've never done. But yeah, I'm trying to catch up. I'm kind of a dinosaur with technology and things, but I realize it's just a tool, and I'm trying to surrender into that. So,
right.
So people may be able to contact me through Instagram soon too.
Well, I'll be sure to share your links and wherever you are.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I guess last question, just since you've been on tour and everything's different day to day, do you find, I don't know if you already have kind of a daily practice that you do with sound, are you able to find time to kind of self-care with sound and have a practice to keep you kind of grounded as you're all over the place?
Yeah, well, and I've been doing some other work a little bit too, besides sound, but just kind of doing a little personal ceremony and things, but with the sound, it's a little hard on the road sometimes, but the to get up and do my toning in the morning, or to spend time with a drum against a tree or something, so it has been a little difficult in that way, but luckily, what I do is actually my prayer and connection too. So, it helps that when I'm doing my sound healings, I'm having once the sound healing begins, it's communion, it's prayer, it's connection, So I'm blessed that what I do is actually part of my spiritual health, connection, and well-being.
Yeah.
So I get to do it a few hours a week all the time. It's part of what I do.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. But I am looking forward to when, I have a little home where I can kind of wake up and start getting back into like a groove of practice and waking up and doing some toning in the morning or spending some time with one of my healing instruments,
Well, Three Trees, I want to wish you a safe, fun, and exceptional rest of your tour. And thank you so much for taking your time to explain your philosophy, your connection through sound to spirit, and as guided by intuition to really guide you. And this deep, deep connection you have to the divine through sound. So thank you so much for your time today. Great to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, I so appreciate it, and I hope I didn't ramble too much. And for those listening,
it was perfect. Perfect.
I appreciate your patience and letting me get out whatever it is.
It was all meant to be said. Yeah, all meant to be said. Yeah.
And thank you so much for your love and support and all that you do in the world of sound and frequency and your medicine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Sounds Heal Podcast. You can keep up to date at soundshealstudio.com or facebook.com/soundshealstudio. And I look forward to diving in more and more to this field of using sound for health and wellness. Be well and stay tuned.